Welcome to Rub's channel. Please listen to the horror story and enjoy. Arif hadn't returned to his village in over 12 years. Now, a university student in Yogyakarta, he came back only because his grandmother was gravely ill. The moment his motorbike passed the edge of the forest and the massive banyan tree came into view, he felt it. The air thickened, the cicadas fell silent, and a strange pulse stirred in his ears. The tree stood like a god at the center of the village field, its roots snaking like veins over the earth, massive and untamed. Nothing had changed here, except for the red ribbons. A dozen red markers now fluttered from branches and roots, nailed in by a construction crew hired by the government. The plan was to build a new marketplace and relocate the villagers from the flood-prone areas. Arif watched a group of men in orange vests surveying the area, one of them laughing as he kicked at a thick root. The villagers kept their distance. Even the bravest boys avoided playing near it. Arif remembered his childhood, how his grandmother warned him never to go near the tree after dark. "She's still down there," she'd whisper, "and she never forgets." That night, Arif stayed in his grandmother's wooden house, now aged and creaking with time. While she slept, her breathing ragged, Arif went through some of her old belongings, finding a small bundle wrapped in cloth, hidden under loose floorboards. Inside was a photo of a young girl in traditional kabaya, standing next to the tree. Her eyes were blurred out. Scribbled in red ink across the back were the words, "The seventh must never be removed." Disturbed, Arif asked around the next day. Most villagers gave vague, nervous responses, and some outright refused to speak. But an old man named Pak Narto, seated outside the warung, whispered the old tale with trembling lips. "Before the tree, there was a famine," he said. "The village was dying. A girl volunteered, or so they say, to be buried beneath the tree as an offering. After that, the rain returned. The tree grew. But no one was supposed to touch it again." Later that afternoon, a bulldozer arrived. A man in charge, dressed in a white shirt and sunglasses, ignored the protests of the elders. He ordered the first root to be cut. The chainsaw screamed, biting into the ancient wood. At that very moment, the sky darkened unnaturally fast. Crows scattered, and somewhere beneath the village square, something moved. That night, the village wind did not howl, it whispered. It carried with it a sound not quite human, like a woman humming off-key, barely audible over the rustling leaves of the banyan. Arif couldn't sleep. Each time he closed his eyes, he dreamt of being buried alive, the roots crawling over his limbs like cold snakes. At 3 a.m., he awoke to a knock at the door, soft, irregular, and disturbingly polite. When he opened it, no one was there, only the sound of the wind trailing a faint voice. "Return the nail." The next morning, something was off with the children. They were unusually quiet, and several of them sat around the banyan tree in a perfect circle. Their eyes were vacant, and they sang the same eerie tune. 6 notes repeated over and over. A teacher from the local school, Burini, tried to approach them, but the moment she crossed the ring, the children stopped and stared at her in unison. "She waits beneath," they said together, their voices layered as if another voice, deeper and older, was speaking through them. Burini collapsed moments later, seizing on the ground. Her mouth foamed, and she screamed a single name. Layla. She had no known history of epilepsy, and the village medic couldn't explain what happened. Arif watched in stunned silence as the village elders silently performed a strange ritual around her, placing a folded red cloth on her chest and chanting words he didn't recognize. It was clear to him now, this village carried something far darker than mere superstition. Later, Arif spoke again to Pa Narto, who only grew paler at the name Layla. He explained that Layla was the girl sacrificed under the banyan tree. But some claimed she wasn't a willing offering. She was chosen by the elders to represent the village, locked in a stone box beneath the tree during the height of the drought. She was the seventh, Pa Narto said. 7 nails bound the offering to the earth. If even one is removed, she'll rise again, confused and furious. Arif returned to his grandmother's house that evening, shaken. As he walked past the banyan tree, he heard the melody again. 6 notes, whistled now, not sung. When he turned, he saw no one. But his gaze caught something disturbing. One of the red-marked roots had been torn open during the excavation. And there, half buried in the dirt, lay a rusty iron nail, bent, blackened, and pulsing faintly like a dying heartbeat. When the construction resumed the next morning, the workers were unusually quiet. The man who operated the chainsaw, Pak Tono, hadn't come back to the site, and his phone went unanswered. His wife, frantic, claimed he never came home. She last saw him when he waved goodbye near the banyan tree. Authorities began a formal search. His boot prints were discovered near the open route, but they simply stopped. No sign of struggle, no broken branches. It was as if he had been plucked out of existence. That evening, a recording device left by a local vlogger, curious about the tree's legend, picked up disturbing audio. At 1:44 a.m., a woman's voice could be heard singing a lullaby in an ancient dialect. Then came the sound of footsteps, wet, slow, dragging. Finally, the unmistakable rasp of breathing close to the microphone, followed by a chilling whisper. "He stepped where I sleep." The villagers began to panic. Many demanded the project be stopped, but the contractor, pressured by government deadlines, dismissed the legends as backward fear. Arif confronted him, showing the nail he'd found. The man laughed, tossing it into the pile of rubble. That night, his dog was found dead, torn apart, and stuffed into the contractor's own car. Claw marks etched the inside windows. No animal was ever caught. As paranoia spread, a few elders began leaving offerings under the tree, flowers, incense, even raw meat. Some were old enough to remember the last time the tree acted up, decades ago, when someone tried to dig near its base and lost both legs in a freak accident. Pak Narto began sketching the village's history on parchment, revealing a symbol carved on the tree long ago. A spiral surrounding 7 dots, each said to represent a sacrifice. Arif was drawn back to his grandmother's hidden bundle. Inside was a second item he hadn't seen before, a small doll wrapped in crimson thread with human hair sewn into its head. Tucked under it, a note in his grandmother's handwriting. 1 thread per nail. Never untie them. The banyan tree was now half surrounded by equipment, but none dared touch it further. The night after the contractor's pet died, several workers quit, and word began to spread beyond the village. Paranormal YouTubers and reporters tried to enter, but the villagers blocked them, fearful of escalating Layla's rage. Arif, however, felt a compulsion to understand the truth. The deeper he searched, the more he found in whispers, in shadows, in the way his grandmother's house creaked at 2:33 a.m. like someone was walking upstairs. Then a boy named Didi disappeared for 2 hours and returned covered in mud. He couldn't speak at first, but when he finally did, he said he was invited under the tree and saw a face made of roots. He spoke of an offering stone buried in the soil, a flat surface with symbols glowing faintly beneath the dirt. Didi drew the shape for Arif, the same spiral, but the center was cracked and bleeding. Digging cautiously near the spot Didi mentioned, Arif and Paknato uncovered the edge of the stone. It wasn't natural. It was smooth, etched with inscriptions. On it was a warning in Old Javanese: "Do not disturb the circle. To awaken her is to bury yourselves anew." Suddenly, a strong gust of wind erupted from the hole, toppling one of the excavators nearby. The air smelled like rotting flowers and copper. From within the tree, a low moan vibrated through the soil, less of a sound, more of a feeling. That night, a scream was heard coming from the fields, but no one dared go out to check. Arif dreamt of Layla again, only this time, it wasn't from the outside looking in. He saw her face clearly, young, bruised, crying. She reached toward him through tangled roots, mouth agape, as whispering, "It's your turn to remember." When he awoke, his hands were covered in soil. The 5th night after the root was cut, Arif's grandmother passed away in her sleep. Her expression was peaceful, yet a single tear had dried on her cheek. Around her neck, hidden beneath her clothes, was a charm tied with 7 red threads. Each thread matched the string used in the crimson doll Arif found earlier. At the funeral, the village priest performed a rushed and nervous ceremony, avoiding eye contact with the banyan tree as the body was carried past it. Later, while cleaning her room, Arif found a faded letter addressed to the next one. It warned, "The seal breaks when the 7th thread is lost. The tree will feed unless the vow is renewed." There was no explanation, only a hand-drawn map of the old village boundaries. Strangely, they formed a circle, centered perfectly around the banyan tree. That night, Arif stayed up late, reading through old folklore books and colonial archives his grandmother had secretly collected. He found mentions of the village in a 1781 Dutch report describing a native settlement that uses spiritual hostages to trap forest spirits during famine. The moment Arif picked up the crimson-threaded doll from beneath the banyan tree, a surge of cold ran up his spine. The threads had come loose, not torn, but carefully untied, one by one. His fingers trembled as he examined the doll. Now the hair felt damp, and the cloth was warm, as though recently held by someone or something. He wrapped it in an old scarf and took it home, but the chill followed him. That night, while trying to rest, Arif woke to a soft thudding sound. It came from inside the walls, slow at first, then rhythmic. Knock, knock, knock. He opened the door to his grandmother's room and nearly screamed. The doll was sitting on her bed. It wasn't where he had left it, and now its head was tilted, facing the window, directly toward the banyan tree. Outside, the moonlight cast shadows across the village square. Something moved between the roots, slow, crouched, human-like. Arif grabbed a flashlight and aimed it outside, but it flickered and died the moment it hit the banyan. A gust of wind slammed the window shut, and with it came the sound of dozens of soft voices whispering in an ancient language. He recognized only one word, repeated over and over: Bayar, pay. The following morning, Arif buried the doll behind his grandmother's house, wrapping it in cloth soaked with salt water, following instructions from a local dukun, spiritual healer. The dukun warned him, if it returns, she has chosen you. That night it returned, not on his bed, not in the yard, but right outside his door, its head turned backward, staring through the crack at the bottom. Pagnato arrived with an old scroll, one of the last written records of the village's pact. According to the scroll, the 7 nails were tied to 7 descendants, one from each family that lived during the famine. If the lineage ever failed to keep the threads bound, Layla would rise, not to forgive, but to collect. The discovery of another iron nail confirmed the worst. This one was found buried in a villager's rice field, pushed up through the soil as if ejected by the earth itself. It was identical to the one Arif had unearthed earlier, blackened, twisted, still warm to the touch. But what was more alarming was who found it. Mira, a teenage girl from the same bloodline as one of the original families. Soon after the nail's discovery, Mira fell ill. Her skin turned pale, and she began muttering names in her sleep, names of people who had died long ago. She scratched symbols into her walls with her nails, drawing spirals and trees with empty roots. At one point, she screamed so violently her parents had to sedate her. Through her tears, she cried, "She's under the roots. She's looking up." At dawn, the banyan tree began to bleed. A dark sap oozed from its trunk, sticky and red, pooling at its base. The villagers gathered to pray, placing offerings around the roots, but it was clear that fear had returned. The older villagers began marking their doors with crushed turmeric and charcoal, ancient symbols to ward off spirits. Arif started mapping where the nails might be, tracing each family's lineage and correlating it with strange occurrences, sudden illnesses, nightmares, even livestock refusing to eat. There were only 2 nails accounted for so far, but 7 had been placed. 5 remained hidden, or worse, disturbed. He feared time was running out. Then, late one night, Mira vanished. Her window was open, and red cloth hung from the sill, torn and swaying in the wind. A single word was etched into her mirror in mud. Tukar. Exchange. After Mira's disappearance, rain began falling over the village, slow at first, then in relentless sheets. The river swelled within a day, flooding the lower paths and isolating the village. Elders whispered that the sky wept, not for water, but as a warning. The ground must be cleansed for what would soon rise. The villagers gathered at the old Mushola, prayer house, to perform a cleansing ritual. But even inside, the air felt corrupted. During the prayers, a black shadow was seen crawling along the ceiling, too fast, too thin to be human. Candles flickered wildly, and a pungent stench filled the room. One man convulsed, his mouth twisting into a grim smile as he screamed in Layla's voice, "The tree remembers your names." The wind outside howled in agreement. Later, Arif spoke with a midwife who had once delivered Mira. She confided a secret. Mira was born under a blood moon at exactly 3:33 a.m. The same time the whispers always began. Her umbilical cord had been shaped like a spiral. "That girl was marked," the midwife said, "before she ever breathed." The prayer house flooded that night. Only the prayer house, no other building. Yet the water inside was not clear. It was thick, almost syrupy, and dark red. When villagers waded in to retrieve the Qurans, they found fish swimming inside, each of them blind. A trail of black footprints led from the mihrab to the exit, but no one had entered. Arif felt trapped. The spirits were closing in, and his dreams had become more vivid. Layla now stood in front of him in each one, closer each time, and she no longer wept. She smiled. Arif remembered something his grandmother had once muttered in her sleep. She was not the only one. He began researching whether more girls were taken under the tree, but records were spotty. Still, in an abandoned storage room behind the village hall, he found something chilling. A ledger listing names, ages, and dates. There were 7 total entries. Layla was only one. Each of the 7 had died within the span of a month. But while Layla was buried in the root chamber, the others were said to be cast to rootless ground. Arif followed the coordinates from an old village map and arrived at a small clearing outside the Banyan's ring. There, he found a circle of stones, long forgotten. No markers, no flowers, just silence. As he knelt to dig at the center, he uncovered a bundle of bones, small, delicate, wrapped in a faded red cloth. He reburied them with prayer, but that night the earth shook. Not like an earthquake, more like a breathing, slow, labored, rising from below. All the animals in the village fled toward the hills. Chickens flew, dogs howled, and broke free of their leashes. And in the banyan tree, the red ribbons tied by the government workers were no longer red. They had turned black. The grave Arif had disturbed appeared the next morning, dug up again. Only this time, it wasn't empty. Someone had placed the crimson doll inside it. Its threads were rewrapped. Its mouth was sewn shut with bone. The village was now gripped with terror. Every night brought new horrors. Screams from the tree, walls that bled sap, shadows watching from corners. The banyan roots grew longer each night, snaking closer to homes, twisting like veins seeking a pulse. Arif realized that the ritual wasn't about burying one spirit. It was about maintaining a seal. The 7 weren't sacrifices, they were keys. Pak Narto, now feverish and near delirium, confessed that their generation had failed. They had lost track of the lineages. One of the descendants had already died without renewing the vow. "We forgot the spiral," he whispered. "We let it open." A new crack appeared at the base of the banyan, large enough for a person to crawl through. Children began drawing spirals on the floor again. One child tried to drown his sibling, claiming the tree asked for one more. Madness was spreading like rot. In a final attempt, Arif rallied the last 5 descendants. Together, they returned to the offering stone with the remaining nails found over the last few days. They placed each nail back into the grooves, but one slot remained empty. The 7th nail, the original from Arif's childhood, was gone. The ground beneath the stone began to breathe. Then it opened. The opening beneath the banyan widened slowly, revealing a sloped tunnel lined with roots slick from decades of moisture. Arif and the remaining descendants stood on the edge, their faces pale, gripping candles and salt sachets given by the village dukun. One by one, they entered, the air growing colder as the tunnel spiraled downward, like descending into a great throat. The smell was overpowering, earth, rot, and something metallic, like old blood. As they reached the bottom, a vast chamber opened before them. The roots formed walls, curling around 7 stone altars. 6 of them were cracked. On the 7th, the crimson-threaded doll lay with its head turned backward, smiling. At the far end, a mound of roots pulsated as if alive. Embedded in it was the final missing nail, gleaming with unnatural light. the silence was broken by Layla's whisper. It echoed through their minds rather than their ears, a sorrowful song in a forgotten tongue. Mira stood at the center, her eyes blank but wide open. She had become the vessel, chosen perhaps from birth. Her body jerked forward, and from her mouth came Layla's voice. The price must be paid, or the spiral opens for all. Arif begged the spirit to take him instead. In that moment, the chamber trembled. The nail fell loose from the root mound, and the roots recoiled as if burned. But Mira turned to him, smiled faintly, and whispered, "It was always me." Before anyone could stop her, she stepped onto the final altar and lay down, the roots rushing to embrace her body, pulling her beneath the earth. The chamber began to collapse. The group scrambled back up the tunnel as roots thrashed and walls cracked. Behind them, Mira's lullaby echoed, softer and softer, until it faded completely. As they emerged from the banyan's base, the opening sealed shut, and the tree fell silent once more. A week passed. The village was quiet, eerily so. The banyan tree stood still, its roots no longer creeping, its leaves finally browning with age. It had not withered, but it no longer pulsed with malevolence. The remaining descendants rebuilt the offering stone and placed 7 handmade dolls in a circle, one for each soul, each promise. Mira's body was never found. Her room remained untouched, save for a new doll that appeared one morning on her pillow, identical to the crimson one, but with golden threads. A sign, perhaps, that the curse was paused, not broken. Arif burned the doll, burying the ashes beneath the spiral etched into the village square. Paknato passed away in his sleep, a faint smile on his face. The villagers whispered that he'd seen something, someone before he died. Some claimed they heard lullabies late at night, and others began leaving offerings once more. Not out of fear, but remembrance. The pact, they now understood, was a circle that must always be honored, even in peace. On the final night of the full moon, a traveler arrived at the village. He asked about the banyan tree, curious about its unusual silence. Arif only replied, "We made our peace." But deep inside, he knew peace was temporary. The tree may sleep, but it never forgets. As the traveler left, a breeze stirred the leaves. For a brief second, a girl's voice whispered through the branches, soft, broken, and waiting. I remember. That's all the horror stories in this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe Rob's channel. And don't forget to share this video with your friends, because the admin will make other interesting horror content.